In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse, but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrance and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrance and Sandy.
Welcome to another episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast, where we delve into topics and offer insights from the perspective of a married couple. I'm Terrance.
And I'm Sandy.
And today we're going to be talking about the American dream. But before we get to that, I'm going to give you the opportunity to see if there's something that you got to say.
More than I'm just tired. I'm actually not tired today, which is...
That is the How Sandy portion of the show. I'm debating on whether or not I'm going to keep doing that portion of the show before we get to the How Sandy, because, you know, How Sandy's becoming so big right now with all your one-word responses.
It was more than one word today.
Well, we haven't gotten to that. So if you said it, it don't count. You got to say it again.
Gotcha.
I was giving you the opportunity to get something off your chest, to talk about something you wanted to talk about, to shout out somebody. Shout out to Jax, who is over there sleeping in his crate. This new podcast area has become one of his favorite areas. And he spends a lot of time over here until we start recording, and then he goes back over into his crate. Now, since we spent that amount of time talking about Jackson not getting into you having something to say, let's move right into the How's Sandy portion of the episode. Sandy, how are you today?
I'm all right. I feel like I'm more stressed than anything.
Why today?
It's just a lot going on this weekend.
See, and that's why I purposely am taking a break from certain activities today.
Yeah.
We went to dinner last night. You guys got this. I don't know how long you're going to be going today. And then tomorrow, it's another event. I can't say what event it is because by the time this comes out, that event will be over. But tomorrow, it's another event. I can't do 3 days in a row. It's too much.
Yeah. But.
And wait a minute. And you went out for dinner on Thursday.
I did. Yeah. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
If I recall.
4 days in a row.
Yeah. If I recall, you were talking about, you know, really having the ability to say no.
Yes. However, I didn't want to say no.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah, I felt like it wasn't too much because today is just movies and a dinner. Like, I feel like it's kind of relaxing. But
I mean, yeah.
It's the other things that people then try to put on my calendar. Like, Ayla wants to do certain things. My mother needs certain things now. And now all of a sudden, where I wanted to have just a relaxing movies and dinner day, it's like, okay, now I got to figure out when am I going to have time to do this and that and so forth and so on.
It sounds to me like you're living the dream. And speaking of dreams, that transitions right into what we're going to be talking about today, and that is the American dream. Now, you hear a lot about the American dream, and I think that the American dream has, you know, changed, or I wouldn't say change. Well, I'm going to say change, but I think depending on who you ask, it's different. And there are a couple of factors that go into what those differences are. But it's interesting to note that that term, the American dream, was actually coined by an author back in 1931 named James Truslow Adams. And basically, he had this book, and the book was called The Epic of America. And the whole purpose of the book was to remind Americans that the myth of the American dream never dies. And since the early foundation of the American nation, people have struggled to make that dream come true. So let's first start out by, I'm going to ask you this question. what is the American dream to you?
Good question. I was more prepared to say of what I felt like it was as a kid.
Well, I mean, and that's fine.
Growing up, I felt like the American dream was, you get married, you have a house with a white picket fence, 2 kids, and a dog.
Yeah, I was never one for the white picket fence, but I hear you.
Like that right there was, and an successful job. That was kind of like the picturesque American dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's it.
Well,
that's mine today.
Yeah, so it's funny because in that book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Truslow basically said that the American dream was that every citizen of every rank can expect to have a better, richer, happier life. Mm-hmm. And those are very simple terms. And I'll take a step back and say 1931, that really didn't apply to everybody, but that's neither here nor there. We'll skip over that. But if I look at that and I say, okay, well, to have a better, richer, happier life, you can take those things and break them down. And I think some of those things that you mentioned fall under some of those categories. But when you start talking about living a better life, when I was coming up, I think that living a better life meant having a better life than the generation before you.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about having a better life, that means some of the things that you mentioned, better jobs. With better jobs came better pay, a better home, better neighborhoods. All those different types of things fall under, to me, that category of living better. And I mean, you can say better food. You can say, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can actually,
just everything say. Better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in general terms, right. Yeah. Everything better. Now, when you start talking about, riches and things like that, all those things start to fall in line if everything is better. I think one of the things that, to me, when you talk about the American dream and you start looking about, okay, well, let's put the generation aside for a second and look at it from the perspective of those who were really, for lack of a better term, low on the socioeconomic, totem pole, or someone who had just come over or, immigrated into this country. And it was really about, if you worked hard, you could have a better life and you can gain riches and all those things through hard work.
Yeah.
And that was, I think that played a big role in why, a lot of people came, and still why a lot of people come from other countries to America. But that was a big proponent of, the American dream. If you work hard, you can achieve. Yeah.
I just wonder, at what point did it become like a rat race over here? You know what I mean? And did that influence that? Like, everybody just working hard to succeed and to have better riches and all that good stuff. Like, is that what kind of set the precedent for that?
It's an interesting question. What I look at, and I can't really speak too much on this, but I'm going to. When I look at immigrants who come to this country and the work ethic that they bring with them, not taking anything away from people who are actually here, I think when you look at other cultures and other countries, that hard work ethic sometimes comes with them. And I know earlier generations, they built that hard work ethic because when you look at what, the industries were in this country, when you start talking about whether it was the auto industry, the textile industry, all those different things that we used to actually create and manufacture here in the States, those were very laborious jobs. And so in order for you to do those jobs, you had to have a very hard, a very strong work ethic.
Well, I think it's because they had a goal and a mission to accomplish, right? Like, I feel like people, when they don't have that, tend to just not work as hard, So if you are poor and you're striving to be not poor, for just simplistic terms, you have that motivation pushing you forward. Now, if you were already born in comfort, like where is your motivation to live comfortably? You're already living comfortably.
Yeah. So you said something that just sparked something, right? So when you don't have, the only way that, and the only legal way that you can actually get is to actually work hard.
Right.
And that was up until a certain point. So if you want to achieve, you got to put in the work ethic. Now, there are some individuals who are more well off than others, and that work ethic doesn't actually have to be the same. So I think what happens is, as time goes on, things do get better. And when I say things get better, I'm talking about from a technology perspective, from an industry perspective. All these new modern tools start to come into place, which makes your work easier, or not necessarily your work, the job that has to be done easier. All these advances make these things easier. And then a number of things start to happen from the perspective of, okay, that part about working hard you can achieve. Well, some of those jobs might not be available anymore because of advances in technology and industry and those things like that. So, you may have a strong work ethic, but you might not be in a position to work. You might not be in the same position to work the jobs that you were able to work before. Because now what happens is those jobs, as either they're sent overseas, they're farmed out. These new jobs, now you got to make sure that you're qualified for those things. And that means now you got to be educated to a certain degree to actually be in a position to be competitive to actually get those jobs.
Right.
And again, when we start talking about living better than the previous generation, education falls into that, right? The hope is that now, okay, well, your previous generation or your parents or your grandparents might not have had the opportunity to go and get schooled at a higher education. But now, because of the American dream, you have that opportunity to go and get schooled and put yourself in a position to be more competitive in these other markets that they didn't have the opportunity to actually be competitive in. And at one point, it was very affordable to do so.
No, you're right. I think, so for me, I feel like my dream, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily American, I think it's just universal, is just to live in peace and comfort. Peace, just, not have drama in my life, just, you know what I mean? Not, just, and then comfort, like, not be poor, but I don't need to be ultra rich either, just comfortable. I prefer not to work.
I'm gonna touch on that. Not that you not working piece. I'm gonna touch on what you said in a second. But the one question the one area I want to touch first before we get there is, in the beginning when you were defining the American dream, when you were younger, marriage was a big part of that. And I think for a while, for a lot of people growing up, that was part of the American dream. And the question becomes, can you achieve the American dream if within that marriage your dreams are different? Or let me rephrase that. How do you handle the challenge of achieving that American dream if you find out that the dreams that each of you have is different?
So, right, I think the purpose of being married within the American dream is that it's two people working together, right? To raise the two kids and the dog and take care of the white picket fence.
I love how you do the dog and the dog.
Well, that's what I remember it being.
Your partner may not want a dog.
No, I know, exactly. So that's kind of like the purpose, right, I think, of marriage being part of the American dream, because now you have two people, you live happily ever after together, right? You're saying, like, and you said, moving towards that common dream, but you're right. Like, what happens when you don't? How do you prioritize whose dream is more important?
Well, two things. One thing that you use the word partnership, and early on, that's essentially marriage was looked at. I mean, there was the love aspect of it, but more or less it was, okay, well, partnering with someone so you can actually work together to achieve more.
Right.
To achieve that family, but at the same time, from an economics perspective, working together. And it didn't always mean working together where both of you had jobs, but working together as a unit to achieve those things. The other part, from the perspective of prioritizing, I think before, when you talk about the American dream and you talk about, okay, well, as a kid, and I think for a lot of people as kids, and the younger generations might be a little different in defining that, but we'll get to that in a second. But I think, when you talk about finding that someone as part of that dream, you got to make sure that when you're looking at the scale, when you're doing interviews or however you want to call it, you have some alignment in what it is that you're trying to achieve from that perspective of, okay, well, I have these dreams and aspirations, and, in order to achieve them, I need to work with somebody, or either I got to work with somebody who has some alignment with those, or listen, I got to go on my own and achieve those.
That brings up another set of problems, right? Like, you're with somebody and you know that you have completely different dreams, and then it's like, oh, I can change their mind.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
But I think somebody's caving, in all honesty, when it comes to the fact that you're right. Hopefully during the dating, courting phase, whatever the heck you want to call it these days, you are finding that you have those commonalities.
Yep.
And hence, that's why you decide to move it forward. But if you don't, and you still decide to go through with it, I think, right, either you decide that it's not worth it, time to go find somebody else, or, like I said, I think somebody's caving. Somebody's going to give up their dream for somebody else. And that's going to
fracture the American dream. Yeah, compromise would be a term that I would say, okay, well, when you get to that point, you got to compromise. If someone has to cave, then chances are that there's probably going to be a point where that partnership is actually going to end.
Yeah.
Depending on who the actual individual is. And that's why sometimes, when you start talking about living a better, happier, I can't remember what else, better, happier, whatever life, the question becomes, is that, can you really reach the pinnacle of that when you're talking about an individual being married? And that's why, there are some questions that you have to answer when you talk about, okay, well, what your dream is, and does marriage align with those dreams? Because if you have two people who can work on that and prioritize, because you can have individual dreams and goals and still function within the confines of that framework of a marriage. But it would take compromise on both sides, and it's about whether or not each individual is willing to actually do that. Now, let's go back to something you said earlier about what your dream was. The question becomes, and I know this, well, I believe I know the answer is, well, I know the answer. I'm not going to beat around the bush. The question becomes, does everyone define that term, the American dream, the same? And the reason why I say that is because when you start looking at the generation today, when I say the generation today, I'm just talking about, I'm not, there's multiple generations. Let's take a step down and say our kids, because we have two who are in their mid to upper 20s. When they look at that phrase that Truslow said, every citizen of every rank can expect to be better, richer, happier. I think in some cases they're changing those terms because I think some people think about happiness and equate happiness to success.
Yeah. Well, Right. So I was going to say, first of all, I don't think what was the American dream is everybody's.
Correct. Yeah, that's
dream.
correct. That's
Like,
fair.
I think there's some maybe underlying common aspects to it, but not everybody wants to be married. Not everybody wants 2 kids. Not everybody wants to own a home. But with that, you're right. I think other things have kind of changed. Like you said, the happiness. I think a lot of times happiness now goes hand in hand, like what you said, success and money. The money will make you happy, but does it really? I don't think it really does. I think you need somewhat of some money. Like you can't be homeless and living off the streets and is that, like, I don't know, maybe you can, to be honest. I've never done it personally, and I'd prefer not to. But, can any of those people be happy? I don't know. I would say probably not.
Yeah,
but at the same time, like, is there a monetary value that goes along with happiness? I think you need to at least be able to take care of your basic stuff, right? But then after that, I don't think you need that much more to be happy, but yet other people need more to be happy. They think they need more to be happy. Like they need the grand house, they need the flashy car. Like, not everybody, but I'm just saying, like, I think sometimes that they strive for these things thinking that it's going to make them happy.
Yeah, and I think, so everyone's definition of happiness is a little different.
Yeah.
Now, true happiness, I think what happens is people can get caught up in the term happy and not really look at the actual totality of that definition. And when you start talking about equating money to happiness, there are people who actually do that. The question becomes, behind closed doors, how truly happy are they? And that's not something that we can answer. But you said something interesting earlier, and there was an actual study that was done, and I don't remember who it was by, but they polled some younger generations, and I can't remember the age group, about the American dream, and 49% of them felt that marriage didn't necessarily come into play when you start talking about the American dream. Well,
Again, kind of how we talked about, I think it's to them the contract itself, I guess we'll call it, of marriage is not that important. I think they probably still want somebody to be a partner in life with, but why do we need a piece of paper? I think that's where they are starting to question.
Yeah, we talked about that in a previous episode. I think the tradition piece,
yes.
When you start talking about the reason for marriage and you start looking at what the American dream was, that was part. It wasn't necessarily, I'm not equating the reason to the dream, but the dream was, listen, and your success, you've reached the pinnacle of success if you're able to get married, buy a home, and have children. And that was it, right?
Right,
now,
pretty much.
Traditionally,
Don't forget the dog.
Oh yeah. Traditionally, it's been you want to get married, and I think, and we had this conversation before, I think that is changing because, and I told you my feeling on it. I don't necessarily believe that two people have to be married to commit to each other.
Yeah. So do you think if you were growing up in today's times that you'd get married?
I don't know. I like to play the long game. And when I start talking about playing the long game and I talk about the American dream, if there's goals that we want to achieve, we have to start looking at what the formula is for us to actually be able to achieve those. And we have to be efficient and we have to be smart. Now, if we're going to spend, let's say, $50,000 on a day that's going to come and go, and you can't recoup that cost right?
Right. Was it worth it?
And I'm not going to say, was it worth it? But is it a better investment to take that $50,000, invest it, diversified, and then 10, 15, 20 years, that 50,000 is 500 to $1 million.
So, which you bring up another good point. So, is that part of the ideal with the American dream too? Not just marriage, but have also a nice big wedding, because you don't need to spend $50,000 on a wedding. You can literally just a couple of people go where you want to go, a church if that's where you're looking to go, town hall if that's where you're looking to go, and actually get married.
That's interesting because I think part of it, I think in some people it is. When they talk about the wedding, well, when they talk about marriage,
they're thinking about
the big
their
part of that,
wedding
they're thinking about the wedding.
party.
Right?
It's basically a huge party.
I'm like, yeah. When you said
Festivities.
party, I equated party with the people who are part of the wedding
like
party.
The festival occasion of a wedding.
I think for some people that is a big part of it. I think it depends on. There are a number of things that it depends on. Culture depends on it. The way they're brought up, religion. There's a whole bunch that actually plays a part of that. I think now, if I was coming up today, I'd be in that 49% that did not include marriage as part of the American dream. Companionship, commitment, yes. Marriage, no. Only because, again, knowing what I know now, knowing what true happiness is, and what's required at times. And when I say what's required, in order to be truly happy, you have to, at times, be in control of what it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
And what you need to do. And there is a financial aspect to that. Right?
Agreed.
So in order to get to that point, you got to start thinking about, okay, well, how can I make smart financial decisions to put me in a position where if I feel like I don't like doing something at this particular point in time, I don't have to do it, and that's going to actually make me happy.
Yeah. So I would have still wanted to get married, but that's more religious purposes than anything. However, I probably would have pushed harder for what I really wanted our wedding to be like, which was just us and a few people on a beach.
Well,
getting married.
You wouldn't have gotten the beach. I'm going to tell you right now. I would listen. If you're just talking about a small ceremony with a few people and not that large investment, then I probably would be able to get on board. But again, I think part of it is too.
But yeah, not the big festival, huge occasion that we had, but just something small, intimate. And yes, I would have preferred to have it on a nice sandy beach and had our honeymoon there while we're at it.
Yeah. You know what else was interesting? And, you mentioned this earlier when they were talking about that study, a big part of that was whether or not marriage would hinder someone from achieving their version of the American dream. Because again, you start talking about that whole what's priority and those things and who caves and who doesn't.
Right. I think if my American dream was just riches, like that's all I cared about, is I want to work my butt off and I want to spoil myself with every luxury that there is out there. I don't know if I'd want to be married, because then marriage is, or even in a relationship potentially, because that unless that person is bringing something to that, they're making their own riches, like they're completely on the same page. At that point, I think it would distract me from my dream, right? Because now I can't work 10-hour days because I have to actually put in some time and investment with this other person that isn't bringing anything to. That's so cynical, but you know what I mean.
It's not bringing anything to it. I think it's time for us to switch gears. Sandy's starting to go down that dark road again. So let's kick happiness to the side for a second, right? There were 3 terms: better, richer, happier. The better part or the richer part.
Well, we'll go with better because I think better, you're right. I think we all stand on the shoulders of somebody else to help us be where we are. Mm-hmm. You know, not many of us start, you know, at the very bottom and crawl our way up to the top alone. Like it's
I mean, there are some, but there
are some, definitely.
Well, and you know what? I think you have a point there from the perspective of when we start talking about, when you think about better, as advancement come along, that automatically makes a lot of your life better. And by that, what I mean is advancements in...
Whoever invented the rice cooker, I love them. You know?
We can say technology, but transportation, medicine, all of those things. I was going to say, you know, food, but there's a debate on that. Yeah, that's a whole different things. But I do think that the generations up until a point may have the opportunity of living better. Mm-hmm. Now, I say that because one of the big issues that we face right now that some people don't believe is true is you know, the whole climate situation. Okay,
because I was going to say we're definitely living longer right now.
I think there's a lot that goes into that. I think, you know, obviously better medicine and things like that.
But yeah, I wouldn't say that the climate is better.
Well, no, climate control is a huge issue. And so when I say for a while, what I mean is, you know, we are living longer. Medicine's better. The way that the knowledge that we have about the things that we need to do, you know, is better. The ability to detect certain things, again, advancements in medicine is better, and that and that leads to people living longer. The other part about that is I think a lot of people are more invested in themselves and they are making more healthier choices, and whether it be, you know, exercise, eating right, those things. And I think those lead to people living longer, and which then you can classify as the ability to live better. Let's get to the richer part and the well, you know what? And these two are kind of joined at the hip, because when you talk about living better, when I look at the future generations and I say, okay, I look at what we have now, and I think that I know for me, I live in a better house than my relatives did growing up. I have access to better things. And part of that, there is a financial aspect that's tied to that. Yeah. When I look at the girls coming up, I look at that opportunity kind of slipping away. Not the medicine, transportation, technology, but when you look at things like the cost of living is increasing and the wage increase is not equivalent. Yeah. Right? Home ownership.
I was going to say the price of home.
Oh, the home ownership in conjunction with the interest rates and all those things, even rent rates. It is very difficult right now for the people who don't own homes, one, to get into the actual market, but two, even to find places to actually rent. And that doesn't seem like it's slowing down. No. Historically, cost of living, cost of homes, those type of things, they increase. And if the cost of home ownership increases and you're in a situation where it's keeping people from being able to get into that market, then that means that they actually have to rent. And if the demand for rentals is high, you know, supply and demand, it's just going to keep rising the costs up to get in. Yeah. So, which is right. I think it's very difficult these days, especially if they don't have the support system that you might have with your parents. Like if your parents are just like, all right, you're 18, get out. Like you're really, they're going to be back at square one, right? Like unless you have the help there. And it just, you made me think of something that we were talking about the other night, which really has nothing to do with the American dream, but it had to do
with clothes and styles coming back.
Yeah.
And so it made me think about that conversation, and it makes me wonder, is there certain things that, people used to do back in the past that may also come back? If you think about it, usually homes were multi-generational. You had like the grandparents, the parents, and the children I guess the grandchildren, all living in one house and working together as like a common unit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is that going to potentially become back almost like the
I think
dream?
it may.
Because like to help, like, like they say, it takes a village to raise kids, and it does. And think about how expensive daycare is. Like, it was expensive enough when we had it, but I can only imagine trying to put multiple kids through daycare today,
I think a lot of that is coming back, and I think the way that certain individuals in this next generation think about that is changing, and I think that they have the opportunity, or from their perspective of the American dream, that is the type of stuff that's actually going to make them richer. And when I say richer, I don't necessarily mean financially, because although some of them equate happiness with success, at the same time, you started talking about all these clothes and things coming back. That same study found that the next generation is less concerned with amassing a whole bunch of possessions, right? And being more fiscally responsible from the perspective, and to a point they have to be fiscally responsible when it comes to those things. They're more in tune to experiencing things, which leads to happiness and fulfillment and richness in their lives. So that American dream, when you start talking about home ownership and those things, that might not be at the forefront in all their minds, but there is some level of happiness or richness or fulfillment, which I think is smart, because now when you look at what has, in our generation and a generation before, part of that American dream, when we start talking about the American dream, a lot of those people are there. Let's be honest, we live in a capitalistic society. A lot of people look at the American dream as, I want to be able to make as much money as possible, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because of the challenges that are now in the forefront, it provides the opportunity for the younger generation or the next generation to think about these things different. And they're much more willing to have an experience that is going to enrich their lives. Yeah. To reuse or be more cost effective when it comes to purchases and things like that. And that it's all tied, because when you start doing things like that, that leads to the opportunity for you to have those resources to go and have these experiences. When you start talking about, I want to travel, I want to spend time with my family, so I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
So, which is kind of funny, because when you first said riches, I wasn't thinking monetary. I was thinking just a richer life, like a more fulfilling type of life. And you're right. There was another study that was done as well, and more people today, rather than giving materialistic gifts, are doing experiences. Like that, because now that goes hand in hand with so many other things. Climate control, you don't have a bunch of waste out there, right? Just us amassing great amount of stuff. People are traveling more. Well, that one could actually impact the climate too, but we won't getting into that.
Got to be some give and take.
Right, there's some give and take. Maybe not have as much plastic in the world, but, we'll let out some fumes from the airplane. But anyhow, so it's become, and I think that is a richer life, is being able to like experience things and just feeling fulfilled and not just working. But again, that's my particular vision, but it seems to be in line with what is happening out there with the majority as well.
Well, no, what that does, it does prove the point. It does prove the point that everyone's definition is a little different, right? When Truslow was mentioning that, better, richer, happier life, when he mentioned riches, they were talking about from the perspective of, okay,
money.
well, so you got to remember this is 1931. They were talking about money, but people look at riches and it's different. I think one of the things that it does for me is it gives me much more confidence in this younger generation. I tell you all the time, I'm concerned about, how our kids are going to be able to make that leap to be in a better position than we were. But when I start doing research and I start looking at what it is that the younger generation views as, a rich life, a happy life, and they're more into the experiences and they're more in tune to the environment and what's going on and those type of things, that gives me confidence in the sense that they're going to be all right.
Yeah. So
we started talking about the American dream. And as we went through this conversation, it's clear that the dream has changed and many people define it differently. So I was going to ask the question, and I'm not, because I think it's time we wrap. I was going to ask the question, is the American dream attainable? And the answer to that is yes, because each person defines that differently. I think we're at a point now where each generation is going to look at what it is that they want to accomplish in their life, and that is going to define what that dream is for them. And I think that that's a great thing, because the traditional definition of what the American dream was is not as easily attainable as it was at one point in time. With that out the way, it is time for my weekly reflection. I saw this the other day. Well, I saw this happen the other day, and it clicked. So sometimes it takes one person to question what it is you're doing before you question what it is you're doing. And let me explain what I mean. Not everything that we're going to do is going to be really in our best interest, and we might not see it at first.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes someone questioning you, saying, what the hell is it that you're doing? Why are you doing that? For you to actually be able to open your eyes and then understand, wow, maybe this is something that I shouldn't be doing. This is not going to work out for me in the long run. So it's good to make sure that you have individuals who are around you who can pose those questions to you when that opportunity comes up. That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Please be sure to follow us and leave feedback on your favorite podcasting app. Until next time, stay well.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.